The woman had spent 5 years and more than $2 million trying to get her father's Ferrari running again. She hired specialists from 3 countries. Nobody could fix it. And then, one night, she let the janitor try. I know exactly how that sounds. But stay with me, because the car was never really the point, and what happened in that parking garage is the last thing either of us expected to find there. If you're new here, this channel is about the men who show up every single day and do right by the people they love, even when it costs them something real. That's the only kind of story I tell. Hit subscribe if that sounds like the kind of story you need to hear right now. My name is Thomas Green, and for 5 years I've worked the evening custodial shift at a corporate tower in Midtown Atlanta. I start at 6 and I finish at 2 in the morning, and in between, I move through 9 floors with a mop bucket that has a cracked wheel on the left rear corner. That wheel makes a sound somewhere between a squeak and a drag every 4 steps, not loud enough to be a real complaint, just present enough that you're always aware of it, which is almost worse than silence. Facilities has had a work order on it for 14 months. I checked on it 3 times in the first month and let it go after that. That's one of the things you learn working in a building like this after everyone else has gone home. You develop an instinct for which problems anyone actually intends to fix, and which ones have been quietly accepted as the permanent texture of the place. You stop fighting the ones in the second category. You incorporate them into your route, your rhythm, your patience. The cracked wheel is mine to carry, so I carry it, 4 steps at a time, every night, through all 9 floors and back again. The floor I know best is sub 2, the lower parking level, 2 floors below the lobby. I'm down there every night around 9, after the executives and their assistants have gone home, and the building belongs to people like me. It smells like concrete and motor oil, and something metallic I could name precisely, but won't, because the smell is not the point. There's a fluorescent tube at the far east end that starts flickering reliably around 2 in the morning, like its own private clock, and I stopped filing maintenance reports on it after the 4th one went unanswered. There's an oil stain near the elevator bank that's been there longer than I have, and no product I've tried in 5 years has fully lifted it. I stopped trying about 2 years ago. I clean around it now. I've come to think of it the way you think of a permanent mark on something you've had a long time. At some point it isn't a flaw, it's just part of what the thing is. You stop seeing it as something wrong and start seeing it as part of the floor, as familiar as the sound of the building settling in the cold. In the far corner of sub 2, under a gray breathable car cover that I dust around twice a week and move entirely once a month to clean underneath, there is a 1987 Ferrari Testarossa in Rosso Corsa. That's the red, not fire engine red, not cherry, but Rosso Corsa specifically, the racing red Ferrari has used since the early 1900s, a color with more brown in it than you'd expect, richer and older looking, the color of something built to go fast that has been standing still for a very long time. It has been in that corner every single night I've worked in this building. The registration sticker on the plate is 5 years out of date. I notice things like that because in the spaces I clean after hours, I notice everything that doesn't change. The stains, the lights, the dates on things that have stopped mattering to anyone keeping track. For 4.5 of my 5 years here, I did exactly what you do with something like that. I cleaned around it, kept my distance, and minded my own business. There are ways of being that serve you. That was one of them, and I held to it until one night in February when I stopped holding to it without quite deciding to. Nia is my daughter. She's 9 years old, and she has her mother's eyes, dark brown, long-lashed, the kind that look like they're paying attention even when she's somewhere else in her head. She's at the age where she asks questions that are too specific to be random and too honest to answer sideways. Questions like, "Dad, do you think people who die can still tell when you're thinking about them?" And she asks them the way she asks everything. Matter-of-factly, while she's doing something else entirely, like pouring cereal or looking for a sock. She carries a stuffed rabbit named Button in the front pocket of her school backpack. Button is gray and has one ear that is slightly longer than the other, and on his chest there is a small heart embroidered in pink thread that has faded now to something quieter than pink, something closer to the color of a thing that used to be bright. Carla gave her Button the Christmas before she got sick. Not the Christmas when we all already knew, but the last fully normal one, when we still had plans and a future that hadn't been revised yet. Nia has never once left Button at home. He goes in the front pocket, ear first, every morning without exception. He is how I know, on days when I can't read her, that she is still all right. Carla died 14 months before this story begins. She was 38. Ovarian cancer, which moved the way that illness moves. Slowly enough to give you hope, fast enough to take it back before you've gotten used to having it. Nia was 8 when Carla was diagnosed, and 9 when she died, which means she is old enough to understand what gone means in every sense of the word, and young enough that she's still building the language to carry it. The grief in my house is not loud. It never was. Carla was not a loud person, and Nia takes after her in that. I learned a long time ago that the loudest part of grief is the first week, and after that, it goes quiet and interior and takes up a different kind of space entirely. Nia shows it the way I described. She goes quiet mid-sentence. Something crosses her face, just crosses it, like a cloud. And then she comes back and finishes what she was saying, and we move on. I have never once made her talk about it before she's ready. I don't know if that's the right call. I'm doing the best I can with what I have, which is what all of us are doing, whether we say so or not. I need to stop here and tell you about one particular night, because that night is the reason I am holding a mop instead of a wrench. It happened about 3 months into this job. Nia was coming straight from aftercare some evenings and waiting for me in the lobby. The building desk staff let her wait there, and Marcus, one of the overnight security guards, knows her by name and keeps an eye without making a production of it. On a Tuesday in November, I got pulled to cover a pipe emergency on the 31st floor. Water in the server room, the kind of situation that does not wait for your schedule to clear. I told Nia I'd be back down in 30 minutes. It took 2 hours. When I came out of the elevator into the lobby, she was asleep on the bench along the south wall, her backpack across her lap, her arms around it, her chin resting on top, and Button's ear poking out of the front pocket. Marcus had pulled his chair from behind the desk to about 5 feet from her. He was holding his phone, but wasn't looking at it. He was looking at her. I nodded at him. He nodded back. I picked Nia up without waking her, carried her out through the lobby doors, and got her buckled into the back seat with Button tucked in alongside her. I drove 2 blocks. Then I pulled over because my chest had locked in a way I didn't know what to call, and I sat on a side street for 11 minutes watching the dashboard clock. I did not cry. I sat with my hands on the wheel and breathed until the locked thing opened. Then I drove home. I never told Nia about those 11 minutes. She never asked about the extra time. I never let her wait in that lobby again, even though the shift never changed, even though rearranging things meant calling in favors and spending money I didn't easily have. Because I had looked at my daughter asleep in a building I cleaned floors in, holding herself together even while she slept, and I understood something in my body that I had only understood in my head before that night. She has one parent left. One. And that parent cannot be somewhere unpredictable. That was the night the arrangement became permanent, and it was also the night I understood why I was never going back to the shop. Before Carla got sick, I spent 15 years as a mechanic specializing in European high-performance engines. I say that plainly, without emphasis, because this is not a story about what I used to be. But you need to understand what the work actually was. It wasn't general automotive repair. It was diagnostic and restoration work on machines built to tolerances tighter than almost anything outside of aerospace. Cars where a variance of fractions of a millimeter in fuel pressure changes how the engine behaves under load, where the difference between a repair that holds at speed and one that fails is the difference between understanding the full system and making an assumption about it. I was the person other mechanics brought problems to when they had ruled out everything obvious. I say that not as pride, but as context. Context for a parking garage in Atlanta, and a woman in a coat, and a conversation I wasn't expecting from either direction. The afternoon before Carla's funeral, I drove to the shop alone, let myself in with my key, and stood in front of the car I'd been working on when she died. I stood there for about 10 minutes. Then, I set my key on the workbench and walked out. No speech, no last day, no explanation to anyone. I had decided Nia needed someone on a schedule she could trust, and the shop ran on hours that couldn't accommodate that anymore. Something closed in me that afternoon, something that had been open my whole adult working life. I learned to live around the absence of it. For 4.5 years that was the arrangement. I walked past that Ferrari every night on my 9 o'clock pass through sub 2, knowing what I knew, and I kept walking. Until one night in February, when I stopped. I was on my normal pass through sub 2, 9:45, and I came around the corner near the Ferrari and noticed the car cover had shifted. The hood was partially exposed and the latch was not fully seated. I have 15 years of not being able to leave a car with an unlatched hood, and that reflex does not disappear just because you changed what you do for a living. I set down the mop handle, lifted the hood properly, and looked at the engine the way you look at something you know from a long time ago and are a little surprised to find still looking the same. I was not thinking about who owned the car or how much had been spent on it. I was just reading it, the way you read something, taking in the whole picture before you focus on any single part. And I said out loud, to no one, to the empty parking level, the fault is in the fuel delivery line, upstream of where everyone's been looking. That's why it presents at the ignition. Then I heard heels on concrete and turned around, and a woman in a coat was standing 12 feet away, looking at me exactly the way you look at someone who has just said the thing you've been waiting 5 years to hear. Elizabeth Harrington is 55 years old and the chief executive of the Harrington Group, which her father Richard built over 40 years from a regional supply company into a national logistics operation with offices in 11 cities. She is the kind of person who occupies a room by taking up less space than you'd expect. Not from insecurity, but from the confidence of someone who has never needed to announce herself because people have always come to her. She speaks the way people speak when they've had enough conversations they didn't want to have, that they've learned to say only what's necessary and let the silences do the rest. The morning after the parking garage, her assistant called my cell phone and said, "Ms. Harrington would like to see me at 11. I considered saying I was unavailable. I considered saying I was a janitor, and she had the wrong number. What I actually said was that I'd be there. I spent the elevator ride to 42 trying to understand why, and I didn't arrive at a full answer. Some things move through you before you can interrogate them. That is not always a problem. Her office on 42 has floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, and a desk that is large without being showy, and she was standing behind it when I came in. She did not offer me a seat. She looked at me the way you look at something you are evaluating, attentive but impersonal, the attention of someone gathering information about an object. She said she understood I had made an observation about the Ferrari in sub 2. I confirmed that. She asked what I thought was wrong with it. I told her. The fault was in the fuel delivery system, at a junction upstream of the injectors, and the reason every specialist had missed it was that the symptom pointed directly at the ignition. And when a symptom points directly at something, that's almost always where you stop looking, and almost always not where the actual cause is. She was quiet, in the way of someone waiting to hear whether something that just landed is trustworthy. Then she asked how I could know that without opening the car. I told her that sometimes you can read a failure from the outside if you know what to look for. She considered that, moved past it, and told me about the Ferrari. Richard Harrington bought the car in 1988, the year Elizabeth graduated from college. He drove it every Sunday morning for 12 years, early, before the city woke up, out through the suburbs and back before noon. He died 5 years ago from a stroke that came with very little warning and no proper goodbye on either side. The car had not been started since the day he died. She had retained 4 separate specialists over those 5 years, 2 Ferrari-certified restoration shops, an independent consultant flown from Milan at significant expense, and 1 full engine rebuild completed with a written guarantee. Total expenditure was in excess of $2 million. The car still did not run. She heard what I had said in the garage. She wanted to know if I could fix it. I asked what she was offering. She named a number, more than I made in 4 months. I told her I needed a day to think about it. Something moved across her face then. The smallest recalibration, the particular adjustment someone makes when a conversation goes somewhere they'd prepared for nearly everything except. She said that would be fine. She was already looking at her paperwork before I had cleared the doorway. I rode the elevator down alone and went to my supply closet in the basement and stood in the dark between the shelving unit and the wall. I thought about Carla. I thought about what my hands would feel like on a wrench again after 5 years on a mop handle. Not abstractly but concretely, the specific weight and texture of that kind of attention, the patience it demands, the way it requires you to be fully present in both your hands and your mind at the same time. Something I had discovered, over 5 years, that I missed without ever quite naming it out loud. And I thought about a piece of paper folded in the inside pocket of my jacket, 3 weeks old by then, an acceptance letter from the Larkin Arts Institute, an after-school arts program that Nia's art teacher had submitted her work to without telling either of us. Nia had been accepted. I had not told her. The enrollment deposit was more than I had at that point, and telling her about something I couldn't give her would not be a kindness. I took the letter out and held it in the dark and thought about what my daughter had made that her teacher thought was worth sending somewhere. Then I folded it back along its original lines and put it away. I called the assistant back that afternoon. I would take the job, with one condition. I worked alone, evenings only, after my shift, on my own timeline. The answer came back in 20 minutes. Yes. The first thing I did was not touch the car. I asked Elizabeth's assistant for every invoice, every service report, and every technician's notes from the past 5 years. They arrived in 4 binders. I read them at the kitchen table after Nia was in bed, every night for a week, with a coffee that went cold long before I finished. What I found was almost elegant in its consistency. Every single technician, without exception, had started from the same diagnostic assumption. The fault presented at the ignition, so they looked at the ignition. They were all competent within that assumption. They just never questioned it. They had built an expensive, well-documented, thoroughly professional case for looking in exactly the wrong place. I read through the last binder on a Friday night with Nia's homework spread on the table beside mine, and when I closed it, I sat there for a while thinking about that. 5 years, 4 teams, $2 million, and every single one of them in agreement about where to look. When everybody agrees on where to look, the problem is almost never there. That is the one thing I know with more certainty than almost anything else I know, and it is a thing I have never once been wrong about. I found the fault on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks in, close to midnight. I was on my back on a rolling board under the Ferrari, with a small flashlight held in my teeth, tracing the fuel delivery line from the tank forward, section by section, the way you trace a sentence back when a word doesn't sit right in it. The junction between the low-pressure pump and the delivery rail is not a complex component. In normal circumstances, it gets replaced routinely. But 5 years of total non-use had allowed the seal material to stiffen and warp in a particular way. Not to fail completely, which would have been immediately obvious, but to deform just enough to create a variable pressure drop under load. Enough to mimic ignition stutter exactly. Enough to send every diagnostic mind straight to the ignition and keep it there. I lay under the car after I found it and stayed very still, making sure I was seeing what was there and not what I'd been hoping to find. Then I slid out, sat up, took my notebook from my jacket pocket, and wrote down exactly what I'd found and what would be needed. That was the whole moment. No drama, no performance. Just the work confirming that it had been paying attention all along. Here is what was happening in parallel in the life I went home to each night. 3 weeks in, a letter arrived from Nia's school, paper, sealed, addressed specifically to me, which told me before I opened it that it was not routine. The Larkin Arts Institute enrollment deadline had been moved forward by 3 weeks due to administrative changes in their funding cycle. The deposit was now due in 12 days. The fee Elizabeth had agreed to pay would cover it with a margin. But 12 days was not enough time to do this repair correctly. Rushing means accepting a margin of error that a machine like this one cannot accommodate. It means a repair that might hold for a week and fail when the temperature drops. It means the last object Elizabeth Harrington has of her father ends up worse than when I found it. I could not do that. So I did the only other thing available. I kept every step intact and worked faster everywhere else. 3 nights running on under 4 hours of sleep. Dinner standing at the kitchen counter. Calling my neighbor Berta twice to stay with Nia past her usual time. I moved through those days in a particular kind of focused tiredness I hadn't felt since the years when the shop ran long and Carla would leave dinner on the stove and a note that said, "Eat this before you come to bed." On the 4th night of that stretch, past 1 in the morning, I heard the elevator open at the far end of the level and looked up from under the car. Elizabeth was standing at the edge of the light, in her coat, like she had come directly from working late. She looked at me on the rolling board under her father's car. I looked back. Neither of us said anything. After about 2 minutes, she turned and walked back to the elevator. I went back to work. The next morning, her assistant sent me a message. "Your garage access has been extended and all time restrictions removed." No explanation, no context. I read it twice at the kitchen table while Nia ate breakfast and explained why something her friend Deja had said was completely and factually wrong. I set the phone down next to her cereal bowl and thought about Elizabeth standing in that doorway at 1 in the morning, saying nothing, watching me work for 2 minutes, and then leaving without a word. About what that costs someone who has built the kind of wall she had built, and about what it means when someone with that kind of wall decides, even once, to let you see through it. If you've ever wondered what was going through my mind at that point, or what was going through hers, tell me in the comments right now, because what happened next is something I didn't see coming myself, and I've had years to sit with it. The fuel junction seal arrived on a Wednesday. I installed it on Thursday evening. 2 careful hours of resetting the surrounding connections and allowing the system to settle overnight before I touched anything connected to pressure. Friday, I ran a pressure check at the first 2 verification points. Saturday, I ran the 3rd. Everything read within specification. I could have turned the key on Saturday. I waited until the following Thursday to be certain, because there is a real difference between confident and sure, and on a system with this kind of tolerance, that difference is not a small thing. On Thursday evening, 20 minutes past 9, alone in the parking level, with the building quiet above me, I sat in the driver's seat of the Ferrari with the door closed and turned the key. The engine started. It caught without hesitation and settled into the sound that a 12-cylinder engine makes when everything inside it is in agreement. Coherent in the way that something deeply well made is coherent, where the complexity produces a kind of quiet certainty rather than noise. I let it run for 30 seconds. I turned it off. I turned it back on to confirm. Then I got out, walked to the concrete pillar across from the car, and stood with my back against it, listening to it idle from 8 feet away. The feeling in my chest was not triumph. It was something smaller and harder to name. The feeling of having carried something a long way and being allowed, finally, to set it down. What I didn't know was that Elizabeth had come down again. She was standing at the entrance when the engine started. I didn't hear her come in over the sound of the car. What I registered was a shift in the weight of the room, the particular change a space makes when someone enters it who belongs to what is happening inside it. I looked toward the entrance. She was there. She was very still. I looked back at the car. I gave her that moment because it was hers entirely. You do not look at a person in the first seconds of something like that. She walked to the car slowly and put her right hand on the hood. The engine was still running. She stood with her hand on that hood for a long time, the sound filling the parking level, her hand on her father's car, a conversation happening between the two of them that had nothing to do with me. I turned back to my tools on the cloth and began laying them out in the order I would repack them. I gave her every inch of space the concrete room allowed. When she finally spoke, she had walked to within a few feet of where I was kneeling. Her voice was different from anything I had heard from her before. Not soft, but reduced to something actual, the way a voice sounds when the armor has come off and what's underneath is standing there without it. She said she wanted to discuss the compensation and named a figure considerably beyond what we had agreed. I told her the amount we had agreed on was what I would accept. She was quiet for a moment, looking for the angle under what I had just said, I think. There was no angle. The fee was fair, the work was done, and those were the terms. She said, "I respect that." 4 words. But the register of them, not social, not the phrasing you use when a conversation has gone somewhere you hadn't planned, but something she meant from a place she didn't usually let speak out loud. Those 4 words carried more weight than anything else that had passed between us in all those weeks. I thanked her. I carried my tools to the elevator. She stayed beside the car. I did not look back. I need to tell you about 2 conversations that happened in the weeks before the engine started, because the engine was just the occasion, not the real event. About 2 weeks before the repair was finished, Elizabeth called me up to her office again. This time she came around the desk and sat in the chair across from mine, which was different enough from our first meeting that I noticed it the way you notice when a sentence starts like another one and then goes somewhere you weren't expecting. She asked how I had known where to look when everyone else had missed it. I told her, when every expert agrees on where to look, the problem is almost never there. She was quiet in a way that wasn't strategic, just sitting with it. Then she said, almost to herself, that her father used to say something like that. He used to say a car isn't broken, it's just waiting for someone patient enough. I let that sit in the air between us because it was worth sitting there. Then she asked how long I had worked on cars. 15 years. She asked why I stopped. I said my daughter needed a fixed schedule and nothing else. She didn't push. But something crossed her face when I said my daughter. The same cloud I see cross Nia's face mid-sentence. The thing that isn't quite grief and isn't quite longing and lives in the complicated space between the two. I recognized it. I said nothing, because the things you recognize in another person are theirs to name, not yours. About a week after that, she came down to the garage while I was working and mentioned without particular context that her father used to take the Ferrari out on Sunday mornings. Early, she said, before the traffic. Sundays used to mean something. Now they're just a day. She stopped talking and looked at the wall, and I kept working, and I didn't fill the silence. I had learned, in those weeks, that Elizabeth Harrington needed the same thing from a conversation that the Ferrari needed from a mechanic, someone willing to sit with the actual problem instead of rushing to the obvious explanation. That was all I gave her. It turned out to be exactly enough. I need to tell you about the Saturday after the engine started. I picked Nia up from her friend Deja's house around noon, and on the drive home I took a turn that wasn't toward home. Nia noticed immediately. She always does. She asked where we were going. I told her I wanted to show her the building where I'd fixed something. We parked on the street outside the tower, and she craned her head all the way back to look up at it. The way kids look at tall buildings, like the height itself deserves a specific kind of attention. I told her I fixed an old car in the garage. She asked what kind. I said, a Ferrari. She said cool in exactly the tone of a 9-year-old who doesn't know what a Ferrari is, but is taking your word for it that it matters. Then I told her the car had belonged to a man who loved his daughter, and after he died, his daughter kept it because she didn't know how else to keep him close. Nia sat with that for a moment. She reached into the front pocket of her backpack and took out Button and held him in both hands, not studying him, just holding him, the way you hold something when you need to feel the weight of it. Then she put Button back, zipped the pocket, and looked back up at the building. She asked, "Do you think she feels better now?" I said I thought maybe she was starting to. Nia nodded the way she nods when she has filed something away somewhere real. Then she asked if we could get lunch. I said yes. That was the whole thing, and it was more than enough. I drive differently now, not more carefully, not faster, just differently, the way you drive when your hands on the wheel feel like your own hands again, which is something you only understand if you've spent time using them for something other than what they know. I did not go back to the shop. I am still on the evening shift, still moving through 9 floors with the same mop bucket and the same cracked wheel, and the fluorescent at the east end of sub 2 still flickers at 2 in the morning on its own private schedule. What changed is interior and harder to put into words exactly, but I will try. I stopped treating the things I had set aside as things I had lost. They were just things my hands needed to be free of for a while so they could hold what Nia needed. When I picked them back up in that parking level, on all those late nights, the world did not end. What came back alongside the work was the feeling of being in full contact with yourself, not fixed, not the same as before, but present in your own hands again, the way a room breathes when a window that's been painted shut for years is finally opened. A woman on the 42nd floor sent a note to the front desk about a week after the engine started, addressed to me by name. It said only, "He would have liked you." I folded it along its lines and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, in the place where the Larkin Arts Institute letter used to be. Nia is enrolled. She starts in September. She already knows what she wants to make first, a drawing of Button, because she wants to get the long ear exactly right. There is something you set aside when you lost someone. I'm not guessing, I just know, because it is what all of us do. We fold up a part of ourselves that was woven into whoever we lost, or into whoever we were when they were here. And we put it away because we have to, because carrying it and everything else at the same time is more than the chest can hold. And at some point, the folded thing starts to feel like protection. You stop missing it. You build your whole life a little bit around not disturbing it. What I've been sitting with since that Thursday in the parking level is this. The thing you've been protecting yourself from is sometimes the only thing that can put you back in contact with yourself, not fix you, not take back what happened, but put you back in touch with what was already there before the loss rearranged everything. So here is what I want to ask you, and I want you to sit with it for a moment before you answer. Is there something you closed off so you could keep going, something you told yourself you had good reasons to leave alone? What would it cost you, not in money and not in time, but in the simple willingness to feel what's actually in there, to open it back up. If that question landed anywhere near you, tell me about it in the comments. You don't need the answer ready. Just tell me what you're thinking about right now. And if this story found you on a day when you needed it, leave a like, because it helps other people who need it find it too. I'll see you in the next one.